Shanghai GDG is a very interesting developer community.
I'm glad somebody has asked this question.
This is where the magic happens.
This is primarily a question and answer show. So if any of you out there would like to ask questions.
Shanghai GDG.
The Google Drive SDK Google Developer Live session. My name's Ali and this is Lewis.
Good afternoon, sir.
And today we're going to be talking about sharing in Google Drive. Sharing and permissions and what the model looks like. And finally we're going to finish with a bit of code to show you how it all works.
All the geeky stuff with some real work mixed in.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So the first thing I want to talk a bit about is a bit of background on what is sharing in Google Drive. Well, Google Drive itself, I'm sure you've all used it, allows you to collaborate with people on your documents. In fact, I'd say this is one of the most compelling features of Google Drive, is that it's all built in. You share a link with someone and then they have access and they can look up the file. In fact, they can modify the file and you can all work on it together. Now, the Google Drive API allows you to perform all the functionality that you would be performing in the user interface in Google Drive itself, but via a computer program. So you can write code to manage all these things. So essentially that is creating permissions for files, listing permissions on files, deleting permissions on files, and updating permissions on files.
So just from the very beginning, what are the different types of applications which live within Google Drive? I remember we recently rebranded, started out as Google Docs, and now we have Drive, which has a number of different applications. Maybe you can walk us through what type of applications those are, and do developers have access through the API to each one?
So our goal with the Google Drive SDK is to cover all the functionality of the Documents List API and perhaps add a bit more. The kinds of application that would use this sharing model are, if you can think of enterprise applications where a domain administrator would like to share a file with a certain number of people, instead of going into the user interface and clicking one by one, add this person, add this person, add this person, you can run a script that would add all the permissions. So you can imagine some kind of document management system within a company. Everyone needs to read this particular file, then the administrator can write a script to do that.
And this works across documents, spreadsheets, presentations, any other type of files?
So that's exactly right. Not only it works on the native Google Docs files, which are, as you said, spreadsheets, docs, presentations, drawings, forms, and the others, but also on any binary files you save in your Google Drive. So photos, PDFs, Word documents, all this kind of thing. There's one unified sharing model across all of these. So your application never needs to think, is this a Google Doc I'm sharing? Or is this a PDF I'm sharing? Or even, is this one of the shortcut style of files that we have in Google Drive? A folder is an example of that, so you can share a folder as well. But from the API's point of view, it's exactly the same. You perform the same operation across a file-like object, and it will do the sharing there. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay,
I mean,
great.
When we look at this, I think you'll go through the demo, and probably some more questions will come up out of that.
Okay, cool. So let's have a look at my neighbor's dog. I really should probably learn the name of this dog, because I'm using him for examples
Let's
everywhere.
call him Benji.
Let's call him Benji. So Benji, in fact, let's just edit the description, shall we? Benji with 2 eyes. I like it.
All right, let's do it.
So I'm a user of Google Drive. I have a photo of this beautiful dog, Benji, and I would like to share it with someone. I click on the share dialog and I enter my friend at dashatest.com. This is Claudio. If you've ever watched our videos in the past, you know Claudio. So let's see. So I've just added Claudio Cherubino at Dashatest to that, and he can edit, or I can set that so he can view the file, or I can set that so he can comment on the file. These are important because these are different roles we're going to talk about. So that's all I've done. I'll save the changes, and it's done. Okay, I'm actually going to now take that off so that I can show you the equivalent operation in the Drive API. Okay, but let's just go over what have we done here. Well, from the API point of view, we've added a permission to this file. And a permission has 3 components. Okay, the first one is the role of the permission. That's the action that whoever is permitted access to this will be able to perform. You saw the options there. They were edit, they were read the file, and they were comment on the file. There's another role that is the owner, that I own this file because I uploaded it to Drive, so I'm the owner there. So that's the first thing, the role. Okay. The second thing is the type of the permission. Now, a type is kind of like a scope, but you can give a permission to a file to either a single user, a whole domain, such as the google.com domain, if all users under google.com, or to the general public. So the type of the permission defines the scope. Okay, so in this case, I gave what we call a user permission. So that was just to a single user. So we've got the role, the type, and then finally the value of the permission. The value is the user or the domain or public or whatever that I granted access to.
And in this case, you only gave access for one user to one single individual file.
Exactly.
And
right.
you're going to go ahead and show us that using the API.
Exactly right. Now, so just to show you there's nothing up my sleeve, you can see I've removed that permission there. Nothing up my sleeves. Okay. So let's just go ahead and do it straight away. Why not? So let's start a Python shell. Okay. Now, as usual, I've created my own auth module that handles auth, so I don't have to show you my user credentials. So from auth import HTTP, there it is. From API client.discovery, we're going to, in the usual way, build a Drive service using discovery. We pass the name, we pass the version, and we pass our authorized HTTP instance. And we should have a Drive object. There we go, ta-da. So first thing I'm going to do is find the file that we want to deal with. Okay, you may already have the file. You may need to get it. So drive.files.list.execute items. So this is going to get the whole list of all the files in my Drive. Then I'm going to get the items. Those are the individual elements in the response. And I'm going to get the first one, and I'm going to read its title. How about that for a long command?
Incredible.
Ta-da! 0.jpg. Those of you who are astute, you know that that was the file I was dealing with. So this time I just want the ID of the file, because I'm going to use that ID then to apply permissions, and I'm going to store it in a local variable called myFileID. So I never need to look that up again. So myFileID has got the ID of the file you want to deal with. That's the files feed. Now, to perform permissions operations, you need to use the permissions feed, which is here, drive.permissions. Now, I'll show you a little trick of the Python library. You can just do drive.permissions, and you can set that to a value, and we've got this perms. And if I press dot, then I get full code completion on that. So it shows me all the operations I can do. First thing I'm going to do is list the permissions. So permissions.list, and always when doing any permission operation, you need to pass the file ID. And you can see here in my beautiful code completion that it tells you file ID string, the ID for the file required. Okay, so file ID equals my file ID, and we execute it. And there we go. So we get a list of these permissions. Now, you can't exactly see that, so we're going to print it nicely. Using the pretty print module. If you don't use this, it's really useful for showing stuff. Right, so there we go. So we can see that the permissions feed has a list of items in there, and each item corresponds to one of the permissions. And you can see we've only got one permission in here, and that is for me. Okay, because I uploaded the file, so it's got my name, and it's got the role that I am, and I'm the owner role. Okay, I can actually transfer the owner role using the same method. But let's now add Claudio. So perms.insert. In fact, should we make the permission object first? So as I said, the permission object has three things. So the type, which we said was user, because we're giving it to one user. The role, well, let's make Claudio a reader first. Okay, and the value, who is is it C Cherubino or Claudio Cherubino? We'll soon know. So that's the permission. Okay, now we do perms.insert. So we're going to insert the permission. We always have to give the file ID, my file ID, and then we pass the permission that we just created as a body, because it's a post request this time. Inserts are always posts, and we send it, and ta-da! It was created. So in the return, we got the new permission object that was created, and we can see that it's gone away and it's resolved Claudio's full name from the email address. This is really useful because you can then, in your user interface for your program, you can display his name. Okay, and then if we list all the permissions again, we should be able to see these. Permissions.lit. In fact, let's print it nicely. So we should see now that we have 2 permissions. Okay, maybe you can't see that because of the scrolling.
I see both you and Claudio have access to that file.
So now both of us have access to that file.
So we have a couple questions. One person was asking, you went ahead and demonstrated this using a Python shell.
Sure.
So they're very curious, what other languages can you use to interact with the Drive API? For example, PHP. What can you do to go ahead and create an application that impacts our API?
So we have client libraries for all the languages, almost. Obviously not all the languages, but the major languages. And we have samples to do this exact functionality in, I think, 8 languages or 7 languages. So if you use Java, PHP, .NET, Python, Objective-C, Go, JavaScript, Ruby, who have I missed out?
That's about all of them.
So if you use one of those languages...
Did you get .NET?
Yeah, we got .NET.
All right,
we never forget .NET. We love .NET developers. We love you. If you use one of these languages, the client library is not only there, but the surface you use is almost going to be exactly like this. So the list method is going to be called list. You might have to create the body in a different way. But you can use any of those languages. Furthermore, this is just a simple HTTPS request. It's just a post. So in answer to that, Lewis, you can write your own client library, or you can use your own language you invented, as long as it can make web requests, and most languages these days can, then you can use that to create these permissions.
Now, we just did a demo of sharing a single individual file with a single individual user. But often there are questions like, how can you get access to an entire folder? Is this enabled through the API as well?
Yeah, so that is enabled through the API. Now, when you share a folder, all the files within it are shared. So this is one of our best practices that we really recommend. If you have 100 files and you want to share them with 100 people, well, that is kind of a painful operation. But if you put all these files into a single folder and you share that folder with everyone, then you're going to be absolutely fine. They will all get access to that.
How soon until your voicemail is directly on Google Drive there? That would have been straight into one thing and sync this up.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious about one piece. You're talking about sharing a lot of your content. And as for me, I'm somebody who puts a lot of my content on Drive. And that can be, shopping lists from the wife, our to-do list. That can be our kids' photos. Because I know that I can get my content in the cloud no matter where I go. But with that type of thing comes questions around security or permissions. And so what you've shown me is the capability to go into a script and give access to more files. What can I do as a user, or maybe you can tell me how an application can get permission to access my Drive?
Okay, so that is a slightly different thing, and that's based on authorization for APIs.
Mm-hmm.
So what you haven't seen here, and perhaps I should go through it so you can see how, but what you haven't seen is the authorization step. So at some point, this application has asked me, my user, can I access your Google Drive? And I've said yes. And then it's got a token from Google and it's stored that token. And it's using that token to make the requests. So this is really, the user authorizes your application to do stuff, step 1. Then the application does stuff, part of which is authorizing other users to be able to read that file. Okay.
So I can't make an application that goes willy-nilly through everybody's folders and downloads all of it?
Absolutely not. That would be
a bad thing.
Really bad.
Yes.
That would be really bad.
I just want to make sure we covered that. I know in some of our previous TDL sessions, we've walked through that authorization token, and I think it's one of Claudio's favorite phrases. And now that we're at this point, now that we have the authorization that's already taken place, now we're getting deeper into the code of how you can really impact that API and hit the permissions not only for files, but folders
exactly.
as well.
Well, let's have a look. Did it work, in fact? So you saw that there were no permissions on this file. But if I now go to it and I click on the share button, you see that the user I added has actually appeared, and he can view he can view permissions. So let's remove him just as a test, and let's go back here and list the permissions again on the same file. And you can see there's only one person there. In fact, we can see. Okay, there's only me. If we do another insert, but this time we're going to make Claudio be a writer on the file. So now actually Claudio can change the file. So same value, role writer. Oops. See what happens when you do live demonstrations, Les.
That's how they know it's live.
Role value type. Okay, then we do the insert, perms.insert, file ID equals my file ID. There you go. So we're inserting again, but this time you see that it's got the same permission, Claudio, but this time he's a writer. And how does that translate in the user interface? Well, let's close this dialog down and let's reopen it. And you can see he can now edit. Okay, so this is how the permissions model maps directly onto what you've got in Google Drive. And you can do all these operations with Google Drive. It's just one way is the user interface and the other way is through the API.
And one thing I noticed in terms of the way that Google Drive is a little bit different is it automatically recognized your permission changes and you didn't even have to refresh.
Right.
You know, we've gotten away from that model of refreshing to get the new permissions and pull them in. But a lot like Drive captures every keystroke as you modify a file, it also manages to recognize the permission changes that were done through the API without you having to hit F5 or refresh in your browser.
Exactly. Modern web applications, I guess. We're a long way away now from the server web page. Every time you get a web page, the information can be updated. There's Google Drive itself, where you can look in the Explorer console, in the console in your web browser to see all the traffic going on. There's a huge amount of stuff. It's all very dynamic, lots of little bits, lots of browser channels and that kind of thing. As I say, I'm not giving away any information. You can just go and see all the traffic going back and forth. But yeah, that's, I'd say these days, to be a well-behaved modern web application, you would actually have to do it like that, yeah. So
we were talking about the Drive API. Now, is it new? I mean, Drive, in terms of a Google product, is fairly new. We've had docs around for some time, and I know we mentioned earlier, we talked about the Documents List API. First, what's different between the Drive API versus the Documents List API relative to permissions? And then second, is it new overall? So yes, it's new overall. Reasonably new. We launched in earlier this year, I'll say. The Drive API is, well, it's new, it's a new surface, but actually it's built on fairly mature technology that brought you the Documents List API. And the Documents List API went from version 1, 2, 3, and the Drive API is pretty much version 4 of the Documents List API. Overall, what has changed is, well, the main thing is the architecture on which the API lives. Okay, and that architecture allows use of nice things like all the automatically generated and up-to-date client libraries, excellent documentation, that kind of thing. So it was really an upgrade to the Documents List API to move it to this better architecture. How has it changed in regards to permissions? Well, one tiny little thing has actually changed, and this we're seeing is quite a big impact for both developers and users. So I'll take a bit of time to explain it. Now, when you list the permissions, I can show you, or when you're looking at a permission, this permission object, you can see that the name of the user is there and all the other information, but the email address of the user is not actually there. So you have this ID, the permission ID, that is this reproducible ID that is very specific for the user, but there's no email address. So before, with the Documents List API, we were seeing that the email address was available in the permissions. Now, why is that bad? You might think it's really useful. Well, it's useful from a developer point of view, potentially, but it's dramatically invasive of a user's privacy. Why? Because you can see the email address of all the other people
who have access to a file. So user A shares the file with users B and C don't necessarily need to know each other. Okay? Now, by putting the email address in there, we were leaking B's email address to C and C's email address to B. And that's not exactly what we wanted. So now we have this permission ID that is returned instead of that. Okay, now that permission ID is constant for the user. So Claudio will always have this permission ID. That way I can match up, so I can make sure I can remove his permission or I can add his permission, do whatever I like just by using that ID, but then the information about his email address is not being leaked.
Now that permission ID, as far as where that's generated, is that generated specifically for this application, or is this, for example, identified with the Google profile? If I were to take that string and plug it into the Google profile, would the user's ID come up?
So no, it's generated specifically for Google Drive. It is related to the user's Google profile, yes, because obviously we have one system for managing users. So it's related to that, and it directly links to that profile. But there are additional bits. For example, you can share with Google Drive a file to a user that is not actually a Google user. So because of that, there has to be some extra things. So I can share it with your Hotmail account. Lewis is cool at Hotmail. No, Lewis is cool.
You got me.
99
I must have seen that. Yes.
At hotmail.com. And even though that's not a Google account, you can still share files with them. So it needs a bit more. But apart from that, it's a similar concept. Okay. Any more questions for me?
Not at this time.
Okay, cool. So we've gone over permissions. Okay, just a little recap. Firstly, the Drive API, anything you can do in the user interface with permissions, you can do with the Drive API. Okay, Drive has permissions on files. Each permission has a type, a role, and a value. The type defines the scope, which can either be a user, a domain, a group, or the whole world. That's called default. That means a public file. The value is the email address, the domain name, the group name for that permission. And the role is what that person can do, what that person or group of people can do with the file. That is, read it, write it, comment on it, or is the owner. Now you can add these permissions purely by making an insert request. As long as you've got your file ID, you make a permissions.insert with that simple body, and it will generate that permission for you. Okay? Those permissions, as Lewis pointed out, are directly and immediately reflected in the user interface so that anyone using that can suddenly see them appear. And using that simple method, you can share files in your Google Drive with anyone using a script. Okay. Oh, and we have examples in all the major languages, so go and check them out. You should just be able to copy-paste them. If you can't, let us know. We're keen to have them all absolutely perfect.
And not only that, but we've done previous Google Developers Live sessions in practically every language. And so we have a series of events writing your first app in Drive in JavaScript, Ruby, Java, PHP, .NET, all of those flavors that we talked about before. So if you're a developer who's just starting to work on Drive and the Drive API, we can get you started, and now you know how to share permissions as well. So appreciate that.
So take the quick start guide that Lewis mentioned, developers.google.com/drive/quick start. Take the one for your language and then copy paste the sample from the reference docs for inserting permissions.insert. And you should be able to go in 5 minutes for the quick start, 2 minutes for the copy paste, 7 minutes, I reckon.
Not bad.
Not bad.
So anything else for us in terms of code or questions?
No, that's all the code. If there have any questions have come through on YouTube, I'm happy to answer them now.
I'm seeing comments on YouTube. There are people excited about ideas on their project. We talked a little bit about different types of languages. So we've walked through that. We talked about sharing folders and explicit permissions. So as far as live comments go, I think we got them all. Okay, cool. So if you have any follow-up questions, we're always on Stack Overflow. The tag is Google-Drive-SDK. Send us a message, send me a personal email. Happy to hear you. If you have any problems, really want to hear from you so that we can work through them. There might be better ways to do something. We might have to improve the API. But please let us know and get in touch. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I've been Ali. It's been Lewis. Bye-bye.